Good morning. You're listening to Retake Our Democracy, a 30-minute weekly show that airs at 8:30 a.m. every Saturday morning on KSFR 101.1 FM, your Santa Fe public radio station. And I'm Paul Gibson, the host of Retake Our Democracy. And today I'm going to be speaking with Seneca Johnson, a leader from the Youth United for Climate Action, or YUCCA. I'll be speaking with her about how the organization is organized, what they do, and how they do it. And they've become quite a force in New Mexican politics. And so we're going to find out more about that today. Last week, I spoke with one of our favorite legislators, Senator Liz Stefanik, Democrat state senator for District 39. We discussed all the legislation that Senator Stefanik will be introducing, quite a bit of that related to climate. It was a very interesting discussion because it's always great to get the perspective of a legislator on how the roundhouse operates or fails to operate. And Senator Stefanik is always very candid. I want to remind you that if you're listening to the show while driving around town and miss any of today's show, you can watch the full YouTube recording of this show and any prior interview by going to retakeourdemocracy.org. That's all one word, and clicking on the Retake on the Radio button on the lower right side of the homepage. You'll find recordings of all our previous shows listed in chronological order, so you can binge watch Retake radio shows for free and cancel your Apple TV subscription. Retake took a break during the holidays with only one blog and no huddles, but the session is almost upon us now, and so this past Wednesday and next Wednesday at 6 p.m., we'll resume our 1-hour weekly Zoom huddles, where we will discuss the bills we support and develop messaging and advocacy strategies for passing those bills. Huddles are also a great way to connect with other advocates. So join us, learn more about how the legislature works and how you can lobby effectively. You must register to attend. And to get more information and a link to register, go to retakeourdemocracy.org and click on the Actions and Events link in the homepage banner. And you'll find a link and some more information about our huddles near the top of the page. Before we get started, I also want to acknowledge that we are conducting this show on stolen Tewa land. And I want to thank our Tewa neighbors for being such good stewards of the land. We could learn a good deal from their custodial caring for the land, water, and air. And we better learn it fast. So that's it for the announcements. Let's meet our guest. Welcome to the show, Seneca. It's been a while since you've been on.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it's my pleasure, believe me. All right, so I always like to let my guests introduce themselves. Can you just tell us how you got involved with YUCCA and a bit about the role you play now in the organization?
Yeah, of course. So my name's Seneca Johnson, she, her pronouns. I'm from the Muskogee and Seminole Nations of Oklahoma, and I grew up here in Santa Fe. So I'm a co-founder and campaign organizer for YUCCA. So I was among the first group of youth back in 2019 who came together to, put together the organization, and I've kind of stuck with it since. In the past, year and a half or so, I've been able to step up in a staff role, and work as staff for YUCCA and help, move that campaign work along.
Okay, great. So you're no longer just a volunteer. Some of the volunteers matriculate up to become staff. Is that it?
Yeah. So most of our members are in high school, and so for those who have some extra time or who are able to, those who either have extra time or are taking some time off, like before they go to college or anything like that. We can either take them on as like paid staff or as interns, because we want to be able to support youth leadership, and that's not always possible if people aren't able to, be paid, and people can have that kind of like clear kind of ladder to move up to.
Okay, sort of like the legislature. It'd be nice if they got paid. Anyway, that's another topic. That's a topic for another day. My impression of YUCCA is that it began as more of a protest organization that was really just trying to sound the alarm and emphasize the degree to which this is a climate crisis, not just a climate change. and that over the last year or so, it seems to have evolved to be being more involved in policy and legislation. Is that an accurate description of the trajectory of the organization?
I mean, I think somewhat. I think YUCCA was formed, by youth from Earth Care's El Puente Summer Leadership Academy back in 2019, with the understanding that we need rapid structural change. So I think you're very correct in that we really wanted to help shift the narrative, from climate change and maybe like global warming and this kind of like more conceptual thing that a lot of people might not have a lot of urgency about, to really talking about like the climate crisis. We have a very limited timeline, and wanting to talk about what it looks like here in New Mexico and how New Mexico contributes to that climate crisis. So while we did originally start organizing specifically for to join in with the international movement for climate strikes and Friday for the Future, we did begin with that protest, but we also were we made sure to tie it into our demands of our elected officials. So some of that included like a moratorium on fracking, a just transition fund from oil and gas revenue, so we can get that just transition, comprehensive climate legislation to get 100% renewables by 2030, community solar, declaring a climate emergency, stuff like that. So I think while our roots are definitely in protest and in direct action, we're also, we want to use every tool available to us and to try and, bring policy into it at the same time. Because we feel like we would just want to, there's a lot at stake and we want to use everything possible. So while we have definitely gotten more involved with policy in the past, couple of years, really making sure that there's spaces in various like coalitions and policy spaces. And in the past year, we've also been able to add a specifically dedicated policy role as a staff person in YUCCA. I think we're still really much trying to find that balance between like direct action and protest and that policy work. So I think we're kind of trying to hold both in our hands.
Okay, and you're doing a very good job of it, I might add. Your website, and you just mentioned alliances with international groups. So I'm going to ask this. Your website describes YUCCA as being aligned with and coordinating with both national and international movements. Can you tell us what that work looks like, the groups that you work with, and how that work benefits YUCCA and its members?
Yeah, of course. So, as I mentioned, we originally began our work by aligning with the global climate strikes that were, at first being organized by Greta Thunberg, and I know in the United States a lot of it was also organized by the Sunrise Movement. But I think with YUCCA's work, we really try and come at it from the lens of like having this global understanding, but having like local and regional action, and making sure that we still kind of have our roots in the ground here. And so we work with a lot of different groups like the Climate Justice Alliance, Indigenous Environmental Network, the Green New Deal. And, we're really trying to do this in order to help inform and strategize about the work, the climate justice work happening on a national, international, and regional level. But also, in turn, making sure that we can connect with other people who are facing similar problems that we face in New Mexico. Because I think we're all kind of facing slightly different versions of this, same kind of monster. And so being able to share, research, knowledge, resources, strategy, and really join in together to call for change, whether that's kind of through protest and direct action or policy or mutual aid. I think that's been something that's been really beneficial, both as, organizers and in this larger like movement building peace. I also mentioned that I think there's also been a lot of calls nationally, especially from indigenous people in the global South, who are very heavily impacted by climate change, and who are especially very heavily impacted by the more false solutions like carbon markets that have been pushed more and more as a so-called solution in the United States and in New Mexico. And so they have, asked the global indigenous community and allies to really work to prevent these false solutions and carbon markets, and, stand kind of in solidarity with them. So I think having these different national and international connections has also been really crucial in helping us to understand the scope of the work we're doing here, and how that, kind of has ripple effects everywhere else. And, can really help ground in the importance of, why it's important to stand our ground. Because the decisions we make here are very directly impacting, our communities and communities across the globe.
Okay, yeah. And I would say that, if you're talking about trying to make transformational systemic change, it helps to be working internationally where you can learn about how that kind of systemic change has been accomplished in other states or countries. So learning from others is a good idea. You don't
Yeah,
have to invent
definitely
the wheel
having
ever.
having
Go
all of
ahead.
these different having all of these different resources and strategies has been really useful, especially because the kind of landscape looks different wherever you go. But there's so much rich history in community organizers and activists who have been doing this work for decades all over. And so, when we find something that, maybe doesn't work here, it can be useful for someone elsewhere, and vice versa. Those other, the connections we've made in the Gulf South, for example, have been really useful in being able to kind of bridge some of the work that we're doing here in New Mexico. And so, yeah, just like what you're saying, having those connections to build this all these different little cogs in the larger machine, calling for transformational structural change.
Yeah, okay. Well, so how many youth are involved in the YUCCA program, and what does that involvement look like? Not everyone can be as involved as you and Jonathan, who unfortunately couldn't be with us today. Tell him I hope he feels better. What different levels of involvement are possible for youth?
Yeah, so we have several hundred youth members across the state, as well as several hundred adult allies. And so really we have kind of three kind of rings of engagement. We have our larger YUCCA network. So it's kind of the aforementioned people who, are interested in supporting YUCCA's work. Maybe they've signed up to our email list, maybe they will come to our actions. They really help inform our work. But these are people that might not necessarily have the time to dedicate to regular meetings, but they still would like to support. So it's kind of like our kind of outer rung of people who want to get involved, but might not necessarily have the time or resources to do so. Then we have our YUCCA members, and so this is very youth specific. So we kind of define that as ages 13 to 25. And so we have meetings about twice a month that youth can join if they want to deepen their engagement. And so that's a way that people can start contributing to the planning process of an action or a campaign, or start to maybe create change in their community, and also just really come in and see how we work to see if that might be a fit for them. So, this might be for people who don't really have time for weekly meetings or might just be new to climate justice organizing. And then finally, we have our kind of core YUCCA steering committee. We have about 10 young people of color in our steering committee who really drive the campaigns and make decisions about, what is important for us to focus on. And so these are all people mostly in high school and the first couple years of college, and they dedicate significant time for weekly meetings and also organizing their peers. And yeah, so that's kind of what different kind of levels of engagement are looking like. But for any youth, we would really particularly encourage people to become members, because you don't have to come in with a certain level of knowledge or anything like that. We really just want people to, if this is something they're passionate about, then we'll be there to help teach them, and I'm sure they can teach us as well.
Okay, and so for people who live, say, in far regions of the state, do they have to come to Santa Fe for these bi-weekly or every other week meetings, or can they join by Zoom?
Yeah, so we conduct our meetings by Zoom because we do have members living in lots of different areas, and even some YUCCA members after graduating from high school have gone out of state to colleges across the country, but still continue organizing with us. So we have our meetings on Zoom, and then we also usually have our meetings in the evenings. That way, it doesn't interrupt people's school schedules or any other extracurriculars that they might have, or people who are working jobs who aren't in school. So we try and make it as accessible as we can. I know we're not perfect, but that's kind of the system that we've been using that's been able to let the most amount of people join without having to worry about distance or traveling or anything like that.
I think it's very reasonable and prudent use of technology. I wish looks like our legislature may not use Zoom for this next session, where they're going to decide on January 16th. So, you've talked about the different roles that youth can play. About how many hours a week do you put in, and how many hours a week do most YUCCA folks put in?
I think me personally, I would probably average out around maybe 25 hours a week. It just really depends on if we're doing, more or less in a week. Sometimes we'll have actions where I'll have like, I'll need to do like 30, 35 hours, 40 hours. Other times, it's a little bit more chill. Um, but I'm also, a paid staff member. So I think that's something that really helps. As far as our YUCCA members, again, it kind of depends. We have about an hour and a half to 2 hour meetings once a week. And then in addition, and so that's kind of the baseline. And then in addition to that, if anyone has the extra time or if we have like particular events, then people can, put in extra time if we're, asking people to give public comment on something or, giving presentations at schools. So it can be more flexible for our steering committee.
Okay, that's great. And I might need to take a quick break here. So I'm going to have to remind our listeners that they're listening to KSFR. It's more important than ever these days, offering timely news, great programming, music, cultural information. All of these things are for free for you, although they cost money on the KSFR end, and they need your support. So in these times of misinformation, the news broadcasts on KSFR, they have great state and local news every hour. They have Democracy Now! Every day, and they have the BBC every day. And then they have good issue-focused conversations like this one on Retake Our Democracy, and just before Retake, Economic Update with Richard Wolff, which I recommend very highly to anyone who really wants to try and understand what's wrong with our economy. He's a brilliant economic theorist. And so what I would recommend all of you do after you get done listening to this program is go to ksfr.org, click on the donate button, and toss them 10, 20, 50 bucks, and look at it as your ticket for admission to some excellent, important programming. And on behalf of KSFR, I want to thank you. Okay, let's get back to our conversation with Seneca Johnson, who is campaign director or coordinator?
Organizer.
Campaign organizer. They don't like, YUCCA doesn't have a lot of the hierarchical things, like directors and coordinators and things like that. And I think it's great. A very participatory process. So you mentioned that the age range of student or youth in YUCCA goes from like 13 to 25. Is there some kind of role that over time you're going to have more and more people? You talked about it, people going off to college and so forth. Some of them may stay in New Mexico. Some of them may go to distant colleges. You mentioned that many of them stay involved in YUCCA organizing. Is there any part of YUCCA that then tries to create chapters at the college campuses and replicate what you're doing there?
I think at the moment, not really. I think we're kind of happy having YUCCA as a more state-based organization. I think we'd definitely be open to doing more kind of like regionally. But at least as far as kind of that college participation goes, a lot of times our members will, they'll carry the work that we do with them. But I think a lot of times there's people who are already organizing in the spaces that they're in the communities that they are, joining. And so they're kind of doing their work to support both like the things that are happening in New Mexico, while also, trying not to kind of parachute into their college communities and say like, oh, we need to be doing this, this, and this, and this is the only way, because it looks different everywhere. But I think it's definitely a possibility to maybe expand outside of the state. But at least for now, we're kind of happy being within the state.
Well, as someone who's a former teacher, I view what you folks are doing as like the most remarkable, like civics learning experience you could possibly get. And there should be ways in which something like this is incorporated in other high schools and middle schools across the country at some point. So I hope that winds up in your cards at some point. But obviously, you got a lot on your plate already just here in New Mexico. Are there rules in YUCCA for adults and elders? And how can older adults support your work?
Yeah, so I mean, even though we're a youth space, I think this is an intergenerational movement. So like in the past, particularly in the pandemic, we would have like weekly calls with our adult allies to discuss what needs people have and what resources people have to offer. Um, but I think right now, we're really appreciating our adult allies who are, like answering our calls to action, sharing resources with us, and letting us share resources with them, and kind of having that kind of reciprocal relationship. Um, and yeah, I mean, we're also always looking for, more adult allies who are willing to, put in some time to like volunteer. Because YUCCA, although we're very focused on climate work, we also are involved with other like mutual aid efforts like Santa Fe Mutual Aid. And so I think there's, lots of different opportunities to get involved, but yeah, we're trying to have this kind of like intergenerational movement despite having, a very like youth-centered, youth-focused organization.
Okay. So I'll want to get more information about those roles that older adults, because that's definitely our audience, sadly. Well, not sadly, it's just we've never cracked it in terms of being able to get a consistent representation of youth involved in the retake work. And so what we tend to do then is just work with youth-focused organizations like yours and support that work and promote it. So, but we'll want to get some more information on that. And can you talk just a little bit about the mutual aid program? Because we got involved in that right when it was launched. I didn't know it was still going. It's still going?
Yeah, yeah. So it's kind of its own separate branch of Earth Care. So Earth Care is kind of like YUCCA's, kind of parent organization. And so now it's its own kind of separate program called Santa Fe Mutual Aid. You can visit the website. I believe it's mutualista.org. But either way, you can find the link on the Earth Care website. But yeah, essentially, we have a lot of different events going on. They are able to help with, connecting people to resources, rent assistance. I know one really big thing is that every month we have what's called a community swap. Um, and so it's, we have a community closet where people can, donate and take clothes for free, kind of like a little free thrift shop. We also have like, what are they called? Food pantries. And, it's all like bilingual too. So, hopefully like language won't be a barrier. And I believe the next one is actually this Saturday, the day this is coming out at the Earth Care offices. So I'd really invite anyone who is interested in either attending or donating or volunteering. That would, I think it'd be really incredible.
Can you give people the information about what time and where? It's because today this will be airing on Saturday at 8:30.
Yes, I will double check, but I believe it's from 12 to 3 at the Earth Care offices, which is, it's right next to the Boys and Girls Club on the south side of Santa Fe. I believe it's like 6600 Valentine Way. Yes.
I think our folks can use their own GPS. All you gotta do is plug in Earth Care and it'll pop up on their GPS. And so if you're interested in finding out more about this, it's 12 to 3 on today, Saturday. Are there any training programs? We just told me you didn't want to ask that question. To what degree do youth drive the YUCCA decision-making process about what to do and how? How does that actually occur? How do you decide what you're going to do? What issues you're going to take on? What protests you're going to launch?
Yeah, so we are an entirely, youth-driven organization. So at the end of the day, it is, our steering committee members making the final decisions on what campaigns we want to take on, what we feel like we have the capacity for, what's important to us, and how we want to execute that. So as I mentioned, we have meetings every week. It's usually facilitated by either, myself or another YUCCA staff member. And yeah, we'll just take the time to really run through, what are some upcoming opportunities that we have, what it feels important to us, what do we want to accomplish, with our short-term goals, our long-term goals, and, we decide things by consensus. And so we do have like adult mentors there who, can help if we feel like we might need some advice or there's a particular piece that we're not sure of. But the whole process is, led entirely by young people, because I think there's kind of a misconception that we don't really know a lot about. We don't really know a lot about these issues of like the climate crisis when a lot of us have already like are impacted by it. And so, we are familiar with the issues and we know what needs to be done. So it's entirely led and driven by us.
So thank you for that. And we're about out of time. So can you just tell our listeners where they can get more information about YUCCA and how they can get involved or donate?
Yeah, of course. So thank you so much for having us. You can find us on our website, yuccanm.org. So that's where you can sign up for our mailing list and see what we're up to. Also, you can contact us through our email, yucca@earthcarenm.org, or our social media, which on Instagram is @yucca.nm. Also, just really quickly want to shout out that we have some events happening January 16th and 17th. One is a virtual energy democracy convergence on the 16th. We have some really cool panels talking about work happening specifically in New Mexico and nationally. You can register for that on our website. And on the 17th is a protest at 12:30 at the Roundhouse. On the first day of the session, we're calling for more bold action taken on the climate crisis, and we'd really love to see you there. If you want any more information for that, it'll again be on our website or on our social media. And thank you so much for having us.
And for those of you who are retake readers or listeners, we will definitely promote both of those events. So I want to thank Seneca for taking the time to speak with me today. I think that our listeners got a really good grasp of what you do and why. And so we'll continue to support your work very, very strongly. I want to remind our listeners that if you want to learn more about how the legislature operates and how you can be effectively involved in advancing good policy and legislation, each week we host Zoom-based huddles where we discuss bills and we support or oppose, and where we develop strategies to advance the bills, including communication strategies. Huddles are a great way to become a part of the growing retake community of advocates. Our next huddle will be this coming Wednesday, January 11th from 6 to 7 p.m. For more information on huddles, go to retakeourdemocracy.org and click on the actions and events in the menu bar, and it'll be just scroll down just inches and you'll get to it. So until next week, continue to have a healthy, happy, and active new year. It's critical to remain active in these times of change and challenge. Retake tries to make it easier for you to be informed and engaged. To get in the game, go to retakeourdemocracy.org and sign up for our blog. You'll get 1 to 2 posts a week with timely analysis of politics, policy issues, and legislation with a New Mexico focus. If you want to stay on top of what's going on at the Roundhouse and when and how you can effectively weigh in, you should also sign up for our alerts. And there's buttons for both of these things on our homepage to the right. We send out alerts when any of the bills we support are being heard in a committee the next day or soon after. The alerts include time and location of the hearing and how you can offer public comment, either in writing or verbally, in person or at the hearing or from home when they allow Zoom comments. The alert also includes a link to a bill summary, speaking points on the bill, and contact information for the legislators hearing the bill. So sign up for the alerts if you want to be kept informed and engaged. And while you are at our website, take a little tour. We have lots of great resources to help you get and stay informed. Use the search engine on the right and plug in any keyword for a topic of special interest to you, and I'll bet you'll find several posts of interest. This is a great way to find out who we are and what we stand for. So until next week, please stay safe, healthy, and active. You've got to stay active. It is the only way we fix this mess. And thank you, Seneca, for being with us today.
Thank you so much.